All right, guys, welcome to Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman. I will be joined shortly by my co-host Scott Karasik. But with me right now is 13-year NFL veteran, former Atlanta Falcons linebacker, played with six other NFL teams, 2002 Ed Block Courage Award recipient. I'm talking with Chris Draft. Welcome to the show, Chris.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you this evening?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing real good.
Okay. Well, Chris, I know you have a lot of stuff going on with your foundation right now, and I certainly do want to talk with you about that as we get further along. But this is a football podcast, so let's talk some football a little bit, right?
We got to do that. We got to talk some football.
All right. So, as a former Falcon, I do want to ask you a Falcons question. Right now, the Falcons are sort of struggling these last couple of games. They've gone 1-4 in their last few games. I'm just curious, from your own NFL playing career, what were some of the things that you could do or you saw teams do successfully to sort of get out of those slumps that the Falcons are currently experiencing?
That's a great question. I mean, what do you do to get out of a slump? And I think in most cases, it's you have to try to make sure you don't try to do something too crazy, too dramatic, but really remind yourself of the type of team that you are. They're not so different from what they were last year in terms of the personnel, but you can absolutely see that the vibe right now, the way they're moving with each other. And then last week you could see they were pressing even more. So there's something that is a little bit off in terms of their comfort level with each other, from Matt Ryan to all the wide receivers, to just the feel of the team. So I think that's where you have to start. Is that you can't press so much, because once you start pressing, then it's all bad. But you have to find a way to stay relaxed, and what you do is you focus on the training. If it seems like they're off, well, we need to throw the ball a little bit more. If you're not vibing with your line, then let's make sure we run this thing a little bit better. Defensively, if we're not communicating as well, let's make sure we're communicating. Let's make sure we over communicate and make sure we're talking. And I think it's thinking about what the fundamentals are that you can win with, and just making sure that you focus on doing them a little bit better.
Now, the Falcons have a lot of youth on their defense. Maybe that inexperience and youth is sort of explaining some of the ups and downs they've had defensively this year. I'm curious, from your own career, it always seemed like to me, as a longtime Falcon fan, and sort of when they decided to move on from you, it always seemed like to me, wherever you went in the NFL, even though you played at a high level, it always seemed like teams were trying to push you out the door for some of these younger guys. I'm curious, sort of, how did you sort of handle that? How did you manage to persevere through that? And sort of, what are some of the issues you've seen when teams try to go with these younger players, particularly on defense?
Yeah, again, that's a great question. Yeah, it did seem like it. At times, they definitely wanted to slide me up out of there. But I think you just have to focus on yourself. And what I always knew, that there are 4 things that you can control, and that is conditioning, fundamentals, knowledge, and character. And I try to max those things out. So they could never say that I wasn't in there working out, running, lifting, taking care of my body, focused in that type of way. They could never say that I wasn't out at practice, working my tail off, getting better at my fundamentals, listening to coaching, taking coaching. They could never say that I didn't know my playbook, because I had 4 notebooks to one of the other guys, and then constantly asking questions. Now, at times they thought I was asking questions that I knew, but I was asking questions because I really wanted to get to those deeper, small, minute points that can be the difference makers. And then character. I wanted them to know you could count on me every day. I'm coming. I'm here. And I think that's what allowed me to continue to play. That's what allowed me to build trust with coaches, and where I ended up going to other teams. But the reason why is because they understood the way I worked. And I think that sometimes you have a feel where you want to you think you need to go another direction, and in my case, unfortunately, that meant I went to some other teams. But I think when you're looking at the Falcons right now, they do have some young guys. Those young guys that played very well last year. And I just think that they're a little bit off, and I think part of it is that they're not sneaking up on anybody. I mean, when you go and pretty much thrash the NFL, I mean they were beating up on teams last year, and anybody that watched that Super Bowl, I mean, there's a lot of Falcons people that are still hurt, and there's a lot of other people that are like, New England Patriots people want to kind of poke fun at 28-3. But everybody else out there knows that the Falcons were absolutely beating their tail, right? Mm-hmm. That they were explosive, they were going to get it, and I think once you take away kind of the I want to just talk a little junk or that you hurt feelings, that you realize the Falcons are they were a scary team, which then coming into the season, everybody has them circled, everybody knows that they're scary, and essentially what they're getting is kind of Patriots treatment, and that you're going to get everyone's best shot.
Definitely. One of the byproducts of playing such a long NFL career is you got to play alongside a lot of great players. That's a testament to sort of your success as well as other players' success. I'm curious particularly because one particular player that you played with early in your career, Bryant mm-hmm. Young with the 49ers, he's currently the defensive line coach for the Falcons. Mm-hmm. Sort of what were your observations as a young player watching one of the best D tackles in the league, and sort of what do you sort of think he could port over from his playing career to being a successful assistant coach?
I tell you, this guy had an absolute motor, and essentially, the four things that I said, from conditioning, fundamentals, knowledge, and character, I mean, he embodied them. This is a grown man. Not just in the sense of when he went out on the field and he manhandled people, but just an absolute grown man, just the way that he walked around. I mean, the respect that he showed to all the people in the building, respect that he showed, to his teammates. That, I mean, he was a guy that could be violent and physical on the field, but, have every bit of respect for people. And again, that's a tremendous guy. So, I think you can absolutely learn. You can learn from him. I mean, if they're not in his hip pocket and just walking around with him, they're crazy. Because this is a guy that can show you how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a father. But then he can teach you. He can teach you about putting your hands on somebody and manhandling.
Absolutely. I'm curious about the Falcons just played the Panthers this past week. And, you were towards the end of the latter portion of your career, but you also got to see some of the young guys up and coming when you were playing with the Panthers, and including Thomas Davis and Julius Peppers. How crazy it to see some of those guys still playing in the league and still playing at such a high level?
It's absolutely crazy. So, Thomas Davis was a rookie my first year with the Panthers. So, he's in his 13th year, which is amazing how time flies. But he actually walked up to me at our mini camp, and it's just amazing how you think of how years, when you're in college, 4 years or 5 years, that's huge. High school, 4 years is 2 years is humongous. But to be in the pros, I mean, you could easily be with somebody that's 10 years older than you. And I think I was about 8 years older than Thomas. So at the minicap, our first minicap, he walked up to me and he said, "Mr. Draft, you were my favorite player with the Falcons." And if you want to feel old, that's a nice way. There's a nice way to feel old, but just that respect and just the way that he approached me. That's the same. That's why he's so respected on the team now. Is that he was respectful from the start. He didn't assume anything. As great as an athlete he was, he was willing to learn. He came with with an open heart in terms of his teammates, and really an open heart in terms of learning. And it was hard because at UGA he was they just kind of said go get the ball and just destroy it, which he did extremely well. But really learning how to play linebacker took some grit. And then, with the injuries that he's had to overcome, it really challenged him that much more. But again, I think the guy that I met when he first came in was prepared to beat for adversity. He was the kind of guy that again, with his mindset, he wasn't overconfident. He was ready to work. He was ready to go after, and that's the type of guy that's going to be able to come back from injuries. Somebody that's going to be able to see the importance of practice every day. That's going to fight and scratch to get a little bit better every day, and then appreciate it along the way. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to see him grow, and I get my updates from my folks there at Carolina, and he just continues to be a tremendous leader on the team.
Sounds like my co-host Scott is finally with us. Scott, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I apologize for the delay. I had some technical difficulties. Now, I was hearing about Chris's last answer being the mentor for Thomas Davis and Julius Peppers. So along that same kind of line, you had an opportunity to play under Wade Phillips here in Atlanta. Were you surprised by the success he's been having throughout the league? Denver with the Rams, Houston, even in Dallas.
I tell you, absolutely not. Absolutely not surprising. I mean, he is a guy that really does care about his players, and he is so much about understanding what a guy does well and putting him in situations so that he can go and make plays. And I mean, from a coaching perspective, that's just right on. Is exactly what you want. I mean, he knows the guys, appreciates the guys, and wants to put them in plays. And then when I say absolutely cares about his players, every time that I've played against him, the first person to tap me on my shoulder after the game was Wade Phillips. And when he sees you and talks to you, I mean, he really does care, and I think that's really why he's been successful. And it's unfortunate when he's had to go to another team. Just we lucked out with getting him in Atlanta because Buffalo let him go, and they let him go because he stuck up for a special teams coach, and he said, "No, I'm not going to fire him." And we lucked out and got him in Atlanta. But I think there's been times where he's had to transition and move on. But I think if you talk to players that have had the opportunity and the blessing to play underneath him, there is a tremendous respect and love for him as a man and as a coach.
Chris, I can't help but notice when I scroll through your career and I notice all the teams you played for, it seemed like every team you played for had a great running back, whether it was Warwick Dunn or Steven Jackson or Marshawn Lynch or Jamal Anderson, Charlie Garner, Fred Jackson. I can't help but make the connection that these running backs became so good because they were practicing against you in practice every day. Is that true?
And that would I would love for that to be the actual connection that you can make on it. But I think unfortunately when you look at some of those numbers, we also had a lot of guys hurt. So a lot of the teams that I was with, we had guys coming off of injuries. So definitely a lot of great guys. But if you see a Charlie Garner, you also have to see a Garrison Hurst. To see a guy like James Allen who came in and played means that there's a Curtis Enos that is hurt in Chicago. To see a Jamal Anderson is, also to see a Jamal hurt where we've got some other guys that we have that wouldn't brought in a Warwick Dunn and a TJ Duckett. So, I mean, Stephen Davis. So some great guys. I mean, I've had just a blessing of being around some tremendous players, and there's, but I can't say that there's a stretch. There is a stretch to say because they were just playing against me again. I would love to say that, but that would be wrong. But I can say I had a blessing of being able to play with some tremendous players, and when you get the chance to see greatness, it's obvious. it's obvious when you see it.
So, kind of taking a little bit of a change up here. Over the past year, and I'd say a year and a half, the NFL's taken a lot of heat in response to the player protests. Colin Kaepernick, as a former player, what are your thoughts on current players using the league as a platform to shine light on some of the social issues going on?
Yeah. Well, you know who you guys are talking to. I mean, I absolutely love the platform of the NFL and our ability to shine the light on social issues. But I think it's important to use the game not just as a platform, but really to use the game as a roadmap. And that is that when we're playing the game of football, it's not just about awareness. It's about solving the problem. And in so many cases, when a team is struggling or a community is struggling, it's a lack of leadership, right? And so, just like what we have to work through, we talked about the Falcons. We said, what do they have to do? And really it comes back to leaders standing up and making sure that they have honest conversations from the coaching staff to the players and really working to get back on track and not blowing it out of proportion, not making it something that's insurmountable, but really making something that we can work at and we can achieve. And I think that's the key that we have to, when we see our players, I think when I look at a guy like Colin Kaepernick is that, he brought awareness to the problem, but the problem had already been there. The key was that people weren't addressing what it actually took to fix it, right? And what did it take? What does it actually take to be able to fix it? It takes having hard and difficult conversations. Well, and that's what we do in football. I mean, who really wants to go in on a Monday after you had a bad game? Who wants to watch that film? I mean, who wants to have to face their teammates when they made some plays that just were questionable? But if you want to get better, you have to do it. If you want to be a better team, you have to do it. And that's really what it comes down to. If we want to be a better community, if we want to be a better country, then we got to have difficult conversations where we come out of it with real solutions. And it's not just about complaining about it. It's not just about, saying, just pointing out the fact that there are problems. Because again, in football, that's not good enough. Fans can point out problems. Commentators can point out problems. But if you're a part of this team, we've got to fix them. We've got to find solutions to those problems, not just talk about them, not just an awareness of problems, but solutions to problems.
Chris, I couldn't say it better than that. We need to get you down in Flowery Branch and maybe inspire some of the current Falcon players to get out of this rut a little bit.
Hey, I'll come down.
Yeah.
I'll go up. I live in downtown, so I go up.
Chris, I want to talk about your foundation. You do a lot of important stuff, work off the field. And as someone who has been prolific throughout their NFL playing career, during your career, and now after your career, sort of what were some of the reasons that inspired you to sort of be that guy that can not only produce on the field, but also make these contributions off the field?
Well, I tell you, a lot of it comes from kind of a visual that my folks would kind of put in our heads, and that was if there was trash on the ground, you pick it up, right? Or you might as well throw it on the trash, throw it on the ground yourself. So if you can see that there's something wrong, you should stand up and fix it. Now, with being able to play in the NFL, I mean, it just really allows you to look at things, very big things, and be able to attack them. And like I said before, is that if we can put that into a football mindset, then it tells you what we need to do. And it tells you where the work is, and I think that too often people don't want to do the relationship work, the team building work that is necessary to actually change it, to change this big problem. They don't want to spend the time together. And that's really where our foundation came from. The Chris Draft Family Foundation, empowering families to live healthy lifestyles, really is seeped in. Yes, we have to give specific knowledge to people, but it has to be about getting to know our people, our individuals, understanding our family dynamics, and really understanding our communities, because all of them are unique. And to appreciate that uniqueness is to actually be able to help somebody.
Chris, you and pretty much every person living has been affected in some way by cancer. But I want you to share with some of the listeners who may not know, sort of what prompted you to really sort of start this foundation, which raises so much awareness and
Wow.
money for lung cancer.
Well, again, thank you for the question. You said before, I had a chance to play for a long time. In 2010 was my 13th year and playing for the Washington Redskins, and been released, and I'm at home. And my girlfriend at the time has challenged me to do P90X and run a 10K race with, which I was fighting against. But, sometimes you just have to say yes, ma'am, and keep it moving. And in December of 2010, she had a little shortness of breath. And it was, a little shortness of breath. I mean, she looked at me, I had asthma, and she said, I might have to use your inhaler. So she was still breathing better than me, but said, just not feeling right. Goes into her primary care doctor because she had a tremendous relationship with him. He said, let's get you some antibiotics, but you know what? Let's just go over and get a chest x-ray. Let's just do that. So she was honest. She went in there right away and then had a great relationship. Said chest x-ray. Came back, a mass in her left lung. 37 years old. And we learned the most important fact about lung cancer, that is anyone can get it. Anyone can get it. Even a 37-year-old woman that was a former dancer for the Charlotte Hornets Honeybees, this amazing shaped woman, anyone can get it. And then, unfortunately, in too many cases, is diagnosed late. So even though she really didn't have any kind of symptoms, except for shortness of breath, it was stage 4 lung cancer by the time that we got the full diagnosis, just, a couple of weeks into it. And unfortunately, with stage 4, there was some options that really there were new options of the time that have presented, some positive results, as of the last 5-6 years. But unfortunately, they don't, they weren't anything that my wife could be on. And so she passed after a year. She passed after a year. I walked with her during that year. But before she passed, we were able to get married. We get married in November 27th, 2011. And before that day, she came to me. She said, what if we don't get presents? What if we ask our family and friends to donate to the foundation so that we can fight against cancer and really fight for people? And I said, baby, that sounds great. I mean, it's not like, we don't need anything, but I would love for us to be able to do that. And I think it's so important as I go around the country and talk. I said it's so important. I want people to know it started with her. So when they see her, in a wheelchair and oxygen, they can understand that money wasn't going to really help her. It was about other people. She had made a choice that it wasn't about her at that moment. We had a great team that was around us. This was about helping other people. And that's what we continued. That's what we continued after she passed away was, when Roger Goodell called me, one of the first people to call me after she passed, he said, Chris, what can we do? Right? And I said, you know what, Roger, I've got to get back with you because I've got to find out how it can be more hopeful, how lung cancer can be more hopeful, because I understood, and I still understand it. The NFL has to be about hope, it's about possibilities, and it's about people. Right? So we had to go understand a story within lung cancer that could be more hopeful. It could, be more positive about the possibilities and be about the people. And that's where our Survivor Series came from. We connected with cancer centers across the country. I've been over 130 across the world. We talked to our docs and said, you guys got to be positive. Otherwise, it's not worth us putting you on. If you can't believe that things are changing, then you can't get on and talk about the need for research. We're building off of something. And then if we want to tell the story, it has to come back to a person. And that's why people are going to care. But more importantly, the people are how we know that the drugs are working. So that's what we've done. We've raised up our survivors. We've challenged our docs to be hopeful. And then with our Super Bowl challenge that we've done over the last 3 years, we're in the 4th year, then we've said, all right, say you're hopeful, show the success story, and let's go out and raise so that we can have more success stories. Let's raise against each other so that people can see all these different groups that are committing to changing the face of lung cancer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. From tragedy, there comes inspiration, and it's great to hear. I understand that you guys are starting up your fundraiser for the Super Bowl challenge. Could you explain that a little bit further?
Absolutely. So we kicked it off. November is Lung Cancer Awareness Month, and so it's just natural that we would start our challenge off. That again allows people to compete against each other. Lung cancer survivors. So it's our Lung Cancer Survivors Super Bowl challenge. Allows lung cancer survivors, so instead of competing, not really competing, but just raising over in this neighborhood or just this city. And unfortunately with lung cancer, because it's not popular, you don't see it. You don't really see what's happening there. And so what we've said is, what if we allow people to raise for your cancer center, raise for your organization, but just raise underneath our umbrella. And whoever raises the most is going to go to the Super Bowl. Whoever raises the second most. So the top 4 the number 1 will go to the Super Bowl. The other 3 have a chance to go to the Pro Bowl, the Taste of the NFL at the Super Bowl, and the National Championship, which is down here in Atlanta this year. And the key is we want them raising, we want them to get out in front. We really want them to be more representatives, not just individuals, but representatives of their cancer center, representatives of their organization. And we're saying when you raise against each other, it allows everyone to be that much more visible. And then whoever, these top fundraisers, then get a chance to be spokesmen. Not just spokesmen for themselves, but they essentially become these national spokesmen for lung cancer. And so we want to make sure that we can identify people that won't be overwhelmed by the Super Bowl, because there's some craziness going on, that aren't overwhelmed by Radio Row when there's just media swarming all over the place, that aren't overwhelmed by being in the presence of Hall of Famers at the Taste of the NFL, where you got tons of these gold jackets running around, that won't be overwhelmed by just the Super Bowl so much that they won't take advantage of sharing their story and connecting with people and really changing the face of lung cancer, not just for themselves, but for the rest of the community.
Absolutely. Chris, where can people go to find out more information on this, and where can they find places to donate?
Absolutely. So they can go to teamdraft.org. Our Super Bowl challenge is the first click. If you want to hit that and support a survivor in your neighborhood, we would love that. If you just want to support our organization, you can go to teamdraft.org and hit the donate button. That will send you to our PayPal, and you can donate that way, man. And we absolutely appreciate all the people that have supported us, that really have stood with us, because this is a grind. I mean, this is a real battle. It's a war. But I know we've got some good people. We've got some good supporters that are around, that allow us to get more with less. So I think as people are thinking about supporting us, know that the relationships that we have with the NFL, the relationship with so many different groups, allow us to get more from their money.
Chris, this was great chatting with you, talking football, talking about your foundation. I hope we can have you back. If there's anything else that you want to plug while you're here, by all means do so. But this was a great time talking with you tonight.
And thank you guys so much, man. I really, really do appreciate you allowing me to share about the work that we're doing. And I mean, because as I talk to the survivors, I tell them, every conversation matters. Don't think that it has to be this, this huge, gigantic one every time. But we have to be willing to share it everywhere. So this is a huge opportunity right here, but we still have to have the other conversations too. So I appreciate you. Thank you for allowing me to be able to share, and thank you for, by me sharing, I get a chance to speak for so many of our survivors, and like I've told so many of them, is if anyone can get lung cancer. My wife was 37 years old. If I really believe that, then I'm not only fighting for our lung cancer community, people that are diagnosed, not just honoring our past ones that have gone on to glory, but really that we're fighting for the people that can be diagnosed in the future. And that could be myself. That could be anyone, because we don't know who it's going to be.
Definitely. Great stuff, Chris. Appreciate it again.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Powerful stuff from Chris Draft. We appreciate him from coming on. You can follow him on Twitter at Chris Draft. Again, hit up the website Team Draft to get all the information on his foundation, where you can donate, as well as worthy causes. Definitely check that out. But as we often do on the show, we're going to turn our attention back to football and talk about the Falcons. We're going to talk about them working out Byron Maxwell, talk about their loss to the Carolina Panthers. We'll preview their upcoming matchup against the Cowboys. And, of course, we'll answer all your guys' mailbag questions. So let's jump right into it. No roster moves so far this week, but the Falcons did work out veteran free agent cornerback Byron Maxwell on Monday. They also worked out a trio of other lesser-known cornerbacks, and Jeremy Boykins and Marcus Cromartie and Robertson Daniel. I believe that's the Marcus Cromartie that Aldrick Robinson toasted last season. So there's that. So Scott, I'm curious. We got a question from Evan Birchfield. He asked, "What's going on with the Maxwell thing? Is someone injured or being cut if we end up signing him?"
The Maxwell thing has a lot to do with Bleedy Ray Wilson's spot on the roster. They do like Bleedy, but at the same time, they think Byron Maxwell's a better fit for the scheme, for the team, and they view him as a special teams contributor as well. This is just what I'm hearing from an agent, so they like him. I don't think that he's taking anybody's spot outside of Bleedy's.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because when I first saw the news that the Falcons were working him out, I was like, oh, maybe this is them preparing greasing the wheels, so to speak, to prepare for Jalen Collins' potential exit, in a couple of weeks. But then I remembered, and then I rewatched the game, and I remembered Robert Alford got hurt towards the end of the Panthers game, and I'm wondering if maybe, in case maybe Alford's status is a little bit up in the air this week, the Falcons were sort of kicking the tires on some cornerbacks in the event that they might have to sort of make a change later this week or perhaps next week if things don't go for the better. So it doesn't sound like the Falcons are sort of going to sign a cornerback this week, but certainly they have opened the door for that possibility down the road. So we'll see what happens, as you say, Scott, with Bleedy Ray Wilson. It's interesting because he's been active for a couple of games this year, but really hasn't gotten that many opportunities to play special teams, which is the primary reason why he made the roster over some other guys that I think a lot of people expected to potentially make the team. So it is interesting if the Falcons do wind up signing Maxwell. I don't think, I've seen a lot of negativity from fans on Twitter the last day or so about the possibility of signing Byron Maxwell just because of the struggles he's had in the past and some of the high profile stuff. But I think people have to remember he's more of a depth guy at this point. And so, a guy with starting experience that can sort of contribute off the bench, I don't think is a bad signing by any means. All right, let's move on to the Panthers game. Obviously, you guys know the Falcons lost that game 20-17. Some of the key stats from the game I thought that sort of stood out to me. The Panthers were dominated in time of possession in the second half with 20 and a half minutes of possession to the Falcons' 9.5 minutes. The Falcons struggled on fourth down conversions. They were 0 for 3 when presented with those opportunities, and part of the reason why they went for on fourth down so much was because of a leg injury that Matt Bryant suffered early in the game. Falcons gave up 167 yards rushing to their own 53 yards rushing. But one of the more positive stats I think was the Falcons were able to create 2 turnovers early. They won the turnover battle, which has been something that's been sorely missing from this team this season. So that is certainly something that they can build upon. Scott, what were some of the other thoughts that you had watching the game this past Sunday?
Well, one thing that I've been wanting to see the Falcons get is a lot more possessions for the offense, because I don't feel like they do an I feel like the offense does well on a per possession basis. It's just getting the ball to them. They've been averaging 10 possessions per game. They got 12 this week. Defense held up pretty well. I think the rushing yards is really what killed the defense. They allowed over 200 on the day. That was just awful. I thought the defense as a whole, though, in the passing attack did a great job. They held Cam Newton to about 55-ish% completion, 137 yards, 5.7 yards per completion. They sacked him once. I would have liked to seen a pick at some point, but I mean, they did their job. Really, offense is where the issue was. I think you're 2 Julio Jones deep passes away from this game going from a 20-17 game to a 28-20 game. And on one of them, Julio Jones kind of pulled up a little bit at the 10 and then was a little overthrown in the end. And then on the other one, Julio just dropped the ball. And I think if he catches that first one and then on that second one, doesn't drop it, game looks completely different to everybody out there. Those two plays completely changed a lot of what was going on in the entire game.
Yeah, I watching the game, rewatching the game earlier today, watching the L-22, I thought the first throw wasn't on Julio at all. I think the slowdown that he had was mostly him trying to adjust to where Matt Ryan was throwing the football. I think Matt Ryan sort of led him a little bit too much over the middle as opposed to up the field, and I think he overthrew that. I think that's mostly on the quarterback. I would probably fault Matt Ryan about 85% for that one. The other two deep throws, though, I think the second one he tried to Julio, I think that was a perfect pass. Julio sort of tripped. I can't remember if that was in the second or third quarter. And it was just sort of incidental sort of tripping. But I think had he not tripped on that play, he would have certainly caught that, and it'd been a big play for the Falcons. And then obviously the one that he dropped in the end zone, that was right on the money, and he just, concentration drop, I guess we could say. But I think, if the Falcons hit on these deep throws, and I think that's been something that's been true throughout the season, whether it's been Matt Ryan being inaccurate, whether it's been drop passes, whether it's been breakdowns and protections, the Falcons seem to be struggling throughout this season to really sort of dial up those big plays and sort of capitalize on them. And certainly I think a lot of the issues on the offense would be somewhat mitigated if the Falcons were able to hit on some of those plays, and I think that's a fair assessment. I wasn't a big fan of the defense's performance. I think they really sort of struggled in stopping Carolina from doing what they wanted to do, which was run the football and sort of use misdirection plays and gadget plays to sort of get the Falcons out of position, which I think were very effective. But, certainly on the relative scale, in terms of what side of the ball was a bigger problem on Sunday, and I think this has been the case throughout the season, and it's one of the reasons why I think the defense has sort of gotten far less slack than they probably deserve in that sense. But certainly the offense was the bigger problem on Sunday. But I think the defense needs to pick it up. I think we came off of a very strong performance against the Jets. I think outside of the Jets game, there really hasn't been any sort of standout defensive performances throughout the season. You've seen the struggles with them in the third quarter with time of possession. Yes, the offense's inability to sustain does contribute to that, but at the same time, there's large chunks of the game where because of the defense's own errors that teams are able to possess the ball for 6 minutes as opposed to 3 minutes. There was a play on the opening drive of the third quarter against Carolina where Adrian Claiborne got a sack on 1st and 10, and that probably would have led to a punt instead of a field goal, but because of Deion Jones getting called for a defensive holding play, gave Carolina a new set of downs, and they were able to sort of convert multiple first downs thereafter. and basically bleed 3 more minutes of clock off the time. That's an entire possession for the offense, and then wound up getting 3 points. So while many people will look at it and say, well, the defense only gave up 3 points, that's good, right? It's 3 points that they had no business giving up due to their own mistakes. So it's one of those things where it's like I don't think you can necessarily count that as a positive, as people oft to do. But yeah, not a great performance from the Falcons. I thought they would play a little bit better, and they did not. So we'll see if they rebound this week against Dallas.
And that's the ultimate goal, is to rebound this week, because I hate to say it, the games that have been played. If Atlanta wants to make the playoffs, they got to get their head out of their ass now and really just get moving. They need to win these next 2 games. If they can win these next 2 games, and I know that's putting a lot on their plate because Dallas is really good, and Seattle probably looks like one of the better teams since Russell Wilson's been there. This is going to be a rough 2 weeks. If they can win both games, I'm not saying kill it on both games. I'm not saying like win 56-0 in both games. I'm saying if they win like 23-22 in both games, just get the W. Get the W the next 2 weeks. The rest of it will work out. And I think the rest of the season looks a lot easier if you're 6-4 after beating Seattle at home and Dallas in the Dome. So, I mean, just, yeah.
Well, I know we got a couple of mailbag questions later on about the Falcons' chances of making the playoffs, but here's one way of breaking it down. You look at the remainder of their season: Carolina, Seattle, New Orleans, Minnesota, and Dallas. All of those teams right now, if the playoffs started tomorrow, with the exception of I think Dallas, or Seattle would be the 7th seed. But basically, all of those teams are basically 4 out of the top 7 seeds in the NFC this year, if I'm doing my math right.
Yep.
Yeah.
As Ric Flair would say, to be the man, you got to beat the man. These teams right now are in the spot that Atlanta needs to be in.
So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like these are 5 out of 7. These are playoff games right now, and so if you guys think the Falcons are a playoff team, and I think they have the capacity to be so, I haven't really seen them play like that since week 3. They have to start winning these games, and it's one of those things where Scott's right. Like they kind of have to go. They got 5 more division games left, but outside the division, they have Dallas, Minnesota, and Seattle, all teams that are in the playoff hunt right now. And so they have to win at least 2 out of those 3 games, in my opinion, to have a shot. And those are 3 of their next 4 games. They have to probably beat Tampa Bay, given that Tampa Bay is a far inferior team. They probably have to sweep the Bucs this year. So, you're looking at a situation where like 4 out of their next 6 games have to be wins if this team is going to have a realistic shot of making the playoffs. So we'll see what they do. But it is playoff. It is crunch time. So another loss, it's going to be hard to it's going to be harder to rebound from this point forward. This was a winnable game. I don't think if they had won the game, we probably would have said that they stole this win. But that's kind of how you have to do. If you're a playoff team facing another playoff team, it's not going to be you dominating that other team for 4 quarters. It's going to be you winning 2 of those quarters, and if those happen to be the 4th quarter or whatnot, then so be it, and you get the W. So we'll see how the team does. Before we move on from the Carolina game, we got a couple of questions from our listeners. Evan Birchfield, of course, asks, who's the brother of the week? Who's the person who did the most? Who won't get the headlines?
I'm going to give it to an offensive player. I don't know. You know what? You go.
It's tough this week. It's tough this week to try to get somebody. I've been sticking with the D line because I think oftentimes we focus on sort of, who's making the big splash plays with the D line. I'm going to give it to Brooks Reed this week just because the one sack that the Falcons got in this game was really caused by Brooks Reed. Vic Beasley got credit for it. It was basically a cleanup sack, but it was really Brooks Reed putting a spin move on on Matt Khalil that really flushed Cam Newton to force him to step up in the pocket, and then Beasley sort of cleaned up on that play. Beasley and Jarrett, I think. So yeah, I'm gonna give Brooks Reed credit. He didn't have an amazing game by any means, but he made a couple of nice plays, and certainly if the NFL had like sack assists or something like that, he should get credit for the sack, and maybe Beasley should get the assist on that one. So that's what I'm going to give Brooks Reed the love there. Who you guys?
Yeah. If I'm gonna go with anybody, I'm gonna go with an offensive lineman. We didn't hear his name a lot this week, which is a good thing. And I didn't think they really created any pressure off that side of the line. I'm gonna go with Ryan Schrader. He was holding his blocks well. You didn't see a lot from whoever was lined up across from him. Charles Johnson was shut down completely. I mean, Schrader was winning in the run game too. Like, rarely were you seeing anything from Ryan Schrader on his side. Like, I know that the rest of the line was having issues, but Schrader did his job on the left side or on the right side of the line. So if I'm going to give it to anybody, it's going to be him.
Okay. We got a question from Jean Kevin Hong. This week's mailbag question: how did Vic look at Sam? Thank you.
Vic looked very good at Sam. I'm not going to say he's like the next great Sam linebacker in this scheme or anything, but he looked like he understood his zone calls that he had to run when he was in. He rarely ran man coverage, and he was blitzing most of the time when he was out there. So, I mean, I like it. I think he's a good fit. If he can continue to improve at Sam the way he has the last couple of weeks, it could end up being the real perfect fit for him, like a Bruce Irvin style fit for him.
Yeah, I thought Vic had his ups and downs in the game. There were certainly some plays where he was a little bit out of position. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we're going to notice over these coming weeks, where as he's getting more comfortable playing linebacker and sort of is changing how he's supposed to read and whatnot, and not having a lot of experience doing that, there are going to be some growing pains. And I think we saw a couple of those in the Panther game, prominently sort of Cam Newton on that bootleg where Vic bit hard on the run action, and sort of Cam broke out and scrambled for a big gain. And certainly he was caught unawares on that play. But I've heard since then that Rise Up reader Michael April said when he talked to Rico Allen after the game, one of the things that they noticed in their film study and their preparation for the game is that Cam was never keeping the ball in those read options during the middle of the field. It was really only in the red zone that they were. He was a threat to keep it, and so I think the Falcons got a little bit hungry, a little bit aggressive on that play, and the Panthers sort of caught them off guard a little bit. So that testament to the Panthers and whatnot. But yeah, I think Vic played well. I think he did some positive things in the run game. I think he did some positive things as a pass rusher. So I think there's still a lot of untapped potential with Vic there. I don't know if we're going to see him sort of blossom into this dominant week-to-week player that we hope he can eventually come before this season is up. But you certainly see flashes of him making plays against the run and the pass at that linebacker position, as well as still maintaining a relatively high level of production when he plays defensive end in the nickel. So certainly a lot of positive with Vic. And we'll deal with the hiccups here and there, and that'll come with the territory. But I think for the most part, the arrow is still pointing up. All right, let's talk about this upcoming Cowboys game. As we mentioned before, it's kind of a playoff game. It's good that the Falcons are playing at home. They coming off of this 3-game road stand. Little fudgy on the injury report with the Falcons. We got a couple of injuries coming out of the game, but Dan Quinn was sort of mum on some of these guys' upcoming status. So I guess we'll find out as the week develops, and certainly we'll keep you guys abreast of that on Twitter and whatnot. But obviously Duke Riley's going to be out still. Matt Bryant suffered a leg injury, as we mentioned earlier. Seems like he's going to play this week, but we'll find out if there's any changes in his status. I guess the three questions are really, what is the deal with Alfred's supposed injury, and sort of if the Maxwell workout is linked to that. And so we'll find out later this week when they practice on Wednesday. And then, of course, Devontae Freeman and Julio Jones dealing with, it's an undisclosed injury with Devontae. He was dealing with a neck and shoulder. Dan Quinn, I think, said in his Monday press conference that it's not a shoulder injury. So I don't know, maybe it's ribs, maybe it's a hip injury. Who knows what's going on with Devontae? And obviously Julio's dealing with some sort of lower body injury. And so their status is a little bit up in the air. I'm only speculating here. I do think they'll play, but I do wonder if they'll be a little bit limited this week against Dallas. I think there was some limitation in terms of how the Falcons used Devontae this past week. It seemed like they were not getting him as involved early in the game, particularly on first downs. They had very much were pass heavy on their first downs during the first quarter, and I think part of that is due to not having Devontae fully healthy. Obviously, Julio was sort of limping around, still able to make some plays. So again, I do think even if these guys are limited this week, they still be able to contribute. But in terms of them being able to sort of carry the offense in the ways that we've been used to seeing this year, that's a little bit up in the air. So I think it's going to be important for other people to step up this week and sort of fill the void if need be. Tevin Coleman, Mohamed Sanu, Taylor Gabriel, and whatnot. On the Cowboys front, their injury status, the major question with the Cowboys is Zeke Elliott in terms of what his suspension is going to be. We'll find out Thursday. I think he's going to have some sort of hearing. I don't know. It's all so convoluted with Zeke in terms of he's suspended or he's not suspended. So we'll find out this Thursday, I guess, if he's going to play on Sunday. Obviously, that's a huge deal. He's probably the MVP of the Cowboys offense, even though Dak Prescott is playing amazing. Another injury that's important, Des Bryant's dealing with a knee and ankle injury, so it's sort of similar to Julio Jones. Sounds like Des will play this weekend, but he may be limited in some form or fashion. Tyron Smith dealing with a growing injury. His status is a little bit up in the air. Terrence Williams, the other wide receiver, dealing with an ankle injury. His status is up in the air. And the Cowboys are a little beat up on the defensive side of the ball with injuries to everybody's favorite former Falcon linebacker, Justin Durant, and rookie Chidobe Awuzie. And their kicker, Dan Bailey's out, but they already have a replacement for him. So, it'll be an interesting game. Neither team looks fully healthy, and so some of these injuries may certainly have a significant impact on the game. But I certainly think the health of the two running backs really could make a difference or the status. Zeke is healthy. The status of the two running backs really could tip the scales in one team's favor or the other.
The Cowboys don't exactly have a guy on the same level as Tevin Coleman as their backup, though. And Coleman's finally starting to get the bend, bang, bounce aspect of the whole run game, too. So that's pretty helpful. But yeah, no, I think Elliott's going to play. There's so many stupid legal loopholes and injunctions and stays and all that other bullshit. Man, just take your 6 games like a man and deal with it. Like, you did that shit, own it, serve your time, come back. Like, don't be stupid. And you should have served the first 6 games of the year. But we're gonna see Zeke Elliott play probably this week. Just assume that he's playing because he's gonna somehow win some emergency injunction or some state. Come on now, it's the Falcons. We don't get anything good. We're not gonna get a Cowboys team without Zeke Elliott. Hell, Tyron Smith's probably gonna play. Knowing our luck.
Fair enough, Scott.
He's probably going to be 100% healthy on Sunday. Terrence Williams is probably going to be fine. Like, don't assume that this team is going to be injured just because they're playing the Falcons. It's 2017, not 2016. There's no luck for this team this year. So assume it's going to be an uphill battle every single game here on out. Go in expecting a hard-fought battle and expecting this Falcons team to at least play hard. And go from there. I'm not expecting this team to win any game from here on out, and I'm cool with that because I want them to prove me wrong. I want them to go 6-2 at a minimum, but I don't see it happen unless they really get their shit together on offense. But let's see. The big things that they have to do, they have to fix their run defense, and it's not just they've got to play harder up front or they got to play harder in the linebacker core. No, as a group, as a front 7, they have to play their fucking gaps the way they're designed to play. They have no gap integrity right now, and it shows. On the flip side, offense, they have to continue to execute when they can and stop fucking up on those plays like Austin Hooper running the wrong route, causing an interception, or Julio Jones dropping a touchdown in the end zone, which never happens. Like that's just a bad luck spot there. That is the microcosm of the entire season. It's been a anything that can go wrong will go wrong kind of season so far. And they just need to get out of their own heads. They need to get a what would you call it? They need to get a sports psychologist and just be like, listen, that was last year. This is this year. Know that stuff's getting in your head. Just forget about it. Go out there, play ball, have fun, and just attack the way your coach wants you to.
Yeah. Maybe they can get Chris Draft. He had some inspiring words earlier tonight, so certainly they need a little bit of a pep talk. It's sort of do and die, and sort of I think one of the issues that you could accuse the Falcons of dealing with this year, and Chris sort of talked about it a little bit earlier. If you guys missed that interview, certainly check it out from at the start where we talked to Chris Draft, former Falcons linebacker. But yeah, it is one of those things where they're getting teams' best shots, and I think there may be a little bit of complacency with the team, and so we'll find out this week whether that's an issue that's going to continue to play them because it's certainly going to be a playoff sort of atmosphere in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this weekend. They're going to face a really good offense and an offense that is better. They've struggled stopping the run this year, and this is by far the best run offense that they're going to face this year. And I have, I'll be honest with you, I definitely have zero confidence that the Falcons will stop the run. So I think a big important key for this game is going to be the offense getting off to a fast start. We've seen that throughout the season. I think they're going to have to be able to maintain that for more than a quarter and a half. I think they're going to have to be able to sort of put up a 2 or 3 score lead by halftime to really give this defense a fighting chance against this Cowboys run game and sort of force the Cowboys to have to abandon the run. Even with that being said, because of the Cowboys' offensive line being so good and assuming guys like Tyron Smith play in this game, it's going to be even harder, even if the Falcons do find a way to sort of build up that lead to then be put in a position where they force the Cowboys to be one-dimensional and then they can start to pin their ears back. They're still going to have trouble getting after Dak Prescott. The team has struggled this year defensively against mobile quarterbacks. We saw that last week with Cam Newton. We saw it earlier in the season with Tyrod Taylor being able to extend plays and make plays down the field. So I think this game really is going to come down to the Falcons offense being able to put it on the Cowboys defense. The Cowboys defense is vulnerable. It is certainly the biggest weakness. And we really do need to see 3 or 4 good quarters of play from this offense when the really for the last month of the season, we've only really been able to see maybe 1 or 2. And it's, this offense needs to finally put it together. Again, I think that's one of the reasons why if Julio Jones are nicked up, that's going to hurt them to some degree. I think they're going to have to find ways to get Tevin Coleman going this week on the ground. He really has not been effective these last couple of games as a runner. He's been more effective in the passing game, but he's been underutilized in that way. Austin Hooper could be a big factor in this game after sort of an up and down performance against Carolina and the Jets with some drops and sort of being the culprit on that interception to Matt Ryan not flattening his route. The Cowboys are 26 in terms of DVOA against tight ends this year. So I do think if Julio is limited and Freeman's limited, the Falcons are going to need some greater contributions from Hooper, among several others, to really sort of carry this offense. And really, I do think this is going to have to be a game where the Falcons are going to have to put up 30 points to win this game. I think what we've seen from this offense the last couple of games with these sort of 17 and 20 point and maybe 24 point outputs is not really going to be enough against this Cowboys offense, who I do think is going to be able to sort of dominate the game in the trenches against this Falcons defense. So I think it really boils down to the offense getting their, as Scott would say, to get their head out of the ass and sort of really coming to life and looking more like that 2016 unit this upcoming week.
Hopefully Freeman is healthy, because I don't, just going based on a cursory review of that Cowboys defense, they don't handle zone attacks very well at all. And I think if the Falcons do base around their zone attack the way that they should, the way that they're pretty much built around, I think they could have one of those games where Devontae Freeman gets 100 yards on the ground if he's healthy. Tevin Coleman gets 80 yards on the ground. And most of it's like chunk yardage, like 10, 15-yard plays. And then you've got just Julio Jones going off on play action, Hooper doing well over the middle in play action. Their linebackers can't cover tight ends. Sean Lee was good at one time, but he can't cover tight ends the way he used to. He's gotten his lower body beaten up too much. So I would love to see the Falcons just attack the middle of the field with Hooper, attack deep. The game plan's there. The ease of just, I don't know, the game plan's there. They can do it. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, Scott. I think leaning on the running game, I think a balanced performance from the Falcons is going to be important. I think, being able to control the clock better than they have, particularly in the second halves of some of these games, will certainly be important. Being able to dial up those explosive plays with Julio or Gabriel against those young, sort of inexperienced Cowboys corners like Anthony Brown and Jordan Lewis. Again, Hooper, again, Tevin Coleman as well. So it's going to be all hands on deck for the Falcons offense, because I do think if the Falcons offense can, again, come out and put up 28, 30, 34 points, it's going to be hard for me to see them winning a sort of a low-scoring game, which has been sort of the case over the last month of the season. Let's get a question from Brian at your homeboy Brian on Twitter. If the Cowboys would have made it to the NFC Championship last season, do you think they would have given the Falcons a real tough game?
I think it would have been pretty tough for the Falcons. The Cowboys' defense wasn't very good, and I think that Falcons' offense would have scored 30 points. But that Cowboys' offense would have been right there with them. Zeke Elliott was killing it last year. They were putting up 30 burgers on people easily, too. It would have been a fun game. I think it would have been a high-scoring game. But I do think that and the game would have been in Dallas, not in Atlanta. So there's a very real shot Atlanta would have lost that game.
Yeah, I think, I certainly recall being a little bit more afraid of the Packers at that point in time than the Cowboys, just because Aaron Rodgers was playing at such a high level, and it's really hard to stop a quarterback playing at the level he was playing at the end of the season, more so than what the Cowboys were doing. But again, I think you're right, Scott. The Cowboys' secret to their success, that they would have beat the Falcons in that game, would have been controlling the ball with Zeke running wild against our defense. Even though I'm very critical of the Falcons' defense today, certainly I would agree that the defense has made significant strides from where they were last year in a lot of ways. So I think that would have been very, I think the over-under on how many yards Zeke would have had probably would have been 200 or so in terms of rushing yards against that team last year, particularly in a home game for the Cowboys. So that would have been the key to them, and if they could have been able to control the clock and keep the Falcons' offense off the field, and sort of mixed in, Zeke turning a 5-yard run into a 30-yard run and whatnot, then they could have been a real challenge for the Falcons. And fortunately, we didn't have to find that out. Fortunately, the Falcons were able to take care of business against Green Bay. But, I certainly think there was a reason to believe that the Cowboys could have won that game. I still would have probably favored the Falcons probably a little bit more heavily in that game. But certainly the Cowboys had a shot. All right, let's move on to the call-outs of this week. This is when we sort of go on our little mini rants on what's bothering us, sometimes with the Falcons, sometimes with the NFL at large, sometimes with, these bad chicken wing flavors, whatever it is. This week, it's me. I think the Falcons defense, my call-out is I think the Falcons defense needs to perform better. I think people are giving them a lot of slack just because they're outperforming the offense, but I think that's a pretty low bar if you ask me. I think a lot of people are looking at the game, and I mentioned this earlier, and seeing, oh, they only gave up this many points. That's a good performance. Yeah, it's a good enough performance, but I think people are often confusing those two issues, the good and the good enough. And so I talked about it earlier, so I won't necessarily bog you guys down with another rant. But Scott, who are you calling out this week?
The people that aren't giving the defense enough credit. Because when you look at the Falcons this year, the defense has been on the field so much. I think Atlanta is one of the worst teams in the NFL when it comes to time of possession. I'm just looking at it right now. And I feel like this team is just on the field all day long. Like, how are they expected to get, I don't know, semi-rested when they're trying to stop the offense every single minute of every single second half? And it's a real second half issue more than a first half issue. Like, yeah, it's tough, and it's tough to, get off the field in the NFL in general, but at a certain point, like, you gotta somehow help your defense out a little bit. I mean, Atlanta's 24th in the NFL in time of possession at like just under 29 minutes. But there's a couple games that skew that even higher than it should be. And if you look at the teams that are down near them, you got the Browns, the Packers, the Bucks, the Bengals, the Raiders, the Giants, the Chargers, the Niners. These aren't teams that are good. These are teams that are awful. Atlanta needs to get their offense on the field more. They need to maintain the ball and maintain time of possession when they get it. And if the offense is on the field for 32, 33 minutes, this defense probably holds other teams to 16, 17 points a game, not 22 points a game where they're at. So, to me, I think the issue is the offense not maintaining drives. The offense maintained drives. The offense scored touchdowns. That would also help the defense because it would help the defense with field position. So that's just the way I look
I hear you, Scott, and I think there is a nugget of truth to what you're saying. Yes, the part of the problem with the time of possession is both an offensive and defensive stat. So part of the blame on the time of possession does lie with the offense's inability to maintain and sustain drives, and particularly in the third quarter. I agree 100% with you. But I think the problem is people are shifting the blame to the offense when it's not really in a lot of circumstances,
but
an offensive issue.
Here's the thing. Say the defense allows a 6-minute touchdown drive or a 7-minute touchdown drive right at the beginning of the third quarter. The offense goes 3 and out. That's the issue. That happens all too often. I think that's probably happened in every game. And that's not how you win in the NFL.
I agree with that, Scott. But
the offense has to maintain on after that drive. You're not going to get a perfect drive every single time. And if the defense has that issue coming out of the half every single game, maybe you should script a second half plan and say, you know what, maybe we should run this, and this, and at least pull off like 7-8 minutes of time, and worst case, kick a field goal.
I agree with you, Scott, on that. But I do think, again, this is the part where I think people are making these sort of general statements and not really looking at what's actually happening in the games. As I said earlier, you look at that opening drive in the third quarter, the Falcons get a sack on 13 minutes left in the third quarter. Adrian Claiborne gets that sack, but it gets completely wiped out by a defensive holding penalty by Deion Jones. So instead of having a 2nd and 16 at midfield, the Panthers now have a 1st and 10. And so then they are able to convert in 2 plays because of defensive mistakes. Devondre Campbell being out of position, them not being able to fit their run fits. So the Panthers have another 1st down. Then they get another 1st down off of a Russell Shepard reverse because, again, the defense is playing poorly. Then they finally get a sack on that Brooks Reed play. And by that time, between those 3 or 4 plays, 3 minutes of time has bled off the field. And all of a sudden, you went from a situation where the Panthers would have been backed up on a 2nd and 16 and probably punting the ball back to the Falcons. And now they're getting a field goal and they've taken a full offensive possession away from the Falcons. That is not because of the offense. That is 100% on the defense. And that's been the issue throughout the season. But the problem is because the offense has a much more egregious problem with a 3-and-out, which I agree with you, is a very big problem. But it's not the only problem. The problem is people look at the 3-and-outs with the offense and say, oh, it's all the offense's fault why they can't maintain possession, and not looking at the defense and seeing that they're making plenty of mistakes. It's a balancing act. The offense is struggling. The defense is struggling. They're both at fault. And the problem is people want to shift the blame only to the offense because the offensive struggles are more obvious.
Well, the problem here is that it's not just that the offense is struggling. It's that the offense was expected to do well. The offense was expected to at least score 27, 28 points a game, and they're scoring 22. The offense was expected to be able to hold time of possession when they get the ball, and they haven't been able to. The offense was expected to move the ball and score points. They haven't been doing that the way that they should be. The defense, on the other hand, is playing about how they've been expected to play. So people are looking at it like, well, the defense is doing its job. The defense wasn't expected to come in and automatically win every single down the way that they're doing. Now, I agree. There are stupid mistakes being made by this defense. They need to cut out all the stupid penalties. Literally, if this defense could just stop committing penalties, period, it would be 10 times better. Because that's the real problem with the defense. It's not, are they not executing? It's, are they committing penalties? Third and 16 in the Bills game, they get a sack, and then, or not the Bills game, the Miami game, they get an interception on like a 3rd and 16, and what happens? Oh man, Grady Jarrett knocked his head off, so we're gonna throw a roughing the passer. Adrian Claiborne gets a roughing the passer on a 3rd down against Tom Brady that Alford picked the ball off. There in the Detroit game, there was a holding call on an interception. So, a lot of issues. And I think it's more down to penalties on defense than actual talent on defense and actual execution on defense.
I agree with you. I think the issues, that's part of my issue. I'll let it go. But I think people are giving the defense credit because they see, oh, look at all this talent. And they're saying the defense is fine. And they're giving them credit for making plays when the talent, I think, is underachieving. Obviously, the offense has a lot of talent. Obviously, people are used to and I think part of the problem was the fact that the offense carried the team for all 19 games last season. And we spent, 85% of the season from that Week 4 game against Carolina on talking every single week about the defense coming together. And even though the defense, people were making up that nonsense that the defense is finally coming together, they only gave up this many points. It was really the offense that was winning the games. And so now the expectation is that is going to continue into this season. And you're right, it's about expectations. It's about the reality that this offense has made a precipitous drop from last year, much greater than people thought. The defense, it was sort of important for the defense to pick up the slack. Unfortunately, that slack has been greater than they can handle. And so they seemingly get a pass for them not being able to elevate their play. They're still young. I understand that. But I think if this team is going to turn their season around, it's not going to be because the offense just suddenly, just magically starts to click again. I think that ship has sailed, in my humble opinion. And maybe we'll talk about that later with some of the mailbag questions. But I think it's going to be more important on the defense to actually stop teams from doing stuff. We knew the Panthers were going to run the football. They ran the ball for 201 yards, right? We knew Cam Newton could make plays with his legs. He had no problem doing that. And that's been the case throughout the season where the defense doesn't stop teams from doing it. We saw the Panthers defense, a legitimately good defense, go up and say, what the Falcons do best? They run the football. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to shut down the running game. That's what good defenses do. I'm tired of this defense basically getting credit for doing the bare minimum, for doing C- level work. And we just say we applaud this defense for basically being below average. And we say, oh, they're so talented and they have so much talent and all this stuff. And it's like nonsense. Win some football games. If you want to if you want to get credit from me, you got to go out here and stop Zeke Elliott. You got to go out here and stop Alfred Morris. You got to contain Dak Prescott. You got to go out there and beat La'el Collins and Jonathan Cooper. You got to shut down Dez Bryant. You don't get credit for basically doing slightly more than a bad offense is doing. And so you get thumbs up for basically being a C minus and a D plus level team. That doesn't fly in my book. That's why it bothers me that people seem to give the defense so much credit for basically doing the basic minimum that they could possibly do. But I'm done ranting about the defense. I'll save it for next week. Let's move on to the rest of the mailbag, guys. I'm sure you guys enjoyed that one. Bruce Luong at Big Boy Brewski, your thoughts on people being on the Fire Sark bandwagon? If we did, which I doubt, what is our realistic and dream option?
I don't mind that people are on the Fire Sark bandwagon because you can see when it comes to what Shanahan was doing in 2015 versus what Sark's doing this year. I mean, Sarkisian isn't really doing better because his process doesn't work as well. There's things that he's calling that you just go, what the fuck is he doing? Why is he calling a screen on a 3rd and 4? Why is he calling a screen on a 3rd and 12? These aren't where you call those plays. So I understand it. Ideally, if the Falcons did fire him, it'd be after the year, which is the smart way to do it. And if they did get somebody, the only person that they should go after is Gary Kubiak. Because I think if you're going to replace Kyle Shanahan, you want an offense like Kyle Shanahan, and everything's about Shanahan, you got to go Gary Kubiak. Because Kubiak taught Shanahan as one of the guys that, helped mold Shanahan to be who he is. Mike Shanahan's the other guy, but Mike's not coming out of retirement. So I think you got to throw Kubiak in. You could have gotten Dennison, who was from that same tree as well, but you decided to go with Sarkisian instead, and I don't understand. But if you can get Kubiak, throw Kubiak in the box, let him know that that's his job from here on out. He has to work with Matt Ryan, and just have Matt Ryan work with Kubiak the way that Kubiak worked with Peyton Manning, all the way through to the end of his career, and just go from there. And let him run this zone blocking, West Coast style offense until his arm falls off.
Yeah, I think you're right, Scott. I think Kubiak is the obvious choice. I'm sure we're gonna find out, sort of what the status is of guys like Hugh Jackson after the season. Obviously, Kubiak, in terms of what he brings to the table, is very similar to what Shanahan brought to the table. Shanahan first served as offensive coordinator in the NFL under Kubiak. We've seen Kubiak come to teams in the past with Baltimore. Like, you look at since the Ravens won the Super Bowl in 2012, 2013, the only good season that Joe Flacco has had was in a Kubiak system, playing that sort of outside zone. That was also, I think that was the big breakout year for Justin Forsett. So it is sort of a match made in heaven. As for sort of firing Sark in season, I think that ship has sailed. I think the only point the Falcons would make that move is basically if they give up on their season, and I don't see Dan Quinn doing that. I think even if the Falcons manage to lose their next 3 games, I still think you're going to find Dan Quinn being like, oh, it's not over yet. We can run the table, all that sort of stuff. So I don't think a Sark firing in season is likely to come. If you're a team that's going to fire your offensive coordinator in season, generally speaking, it means you're a team that's out of the mix. Like, I remember Detroit fired their offensive coordinator a couple of years back, and promoted Jim Bob Cooter around late October, but they were a 1-6 team. They were pretty much out of the season. So them making that move at that point made sense. Most of the other teams that tend to fire the offensive coordinator do it really early in the season. I remember Greg Roman got fired by the Bills like week 2 years ago. Cincinnati did it this past year with Ken Zampese getting fired, I think, after the week 2. I think Baltimore did it late in the season when they fired what's that guy, Cam Cameron, and promoted Jim Caldwell. But the difference again goes back to the Baltimore could realistically think that they could sort of keep things afloat during that transition because of their defense, even though it wasn't quite playing up to their usual standard at that point in time. The Falcons don't have a defense like that. They don't have a defense that can go out there and say, oh, yeah, we can win a 17-14 game while this sort of new offensive coordinator gets things fixed. People thinking that, oh, Gary Kubiak's going to take over, they could fire Sark tomorrow and Kubiak will take over. That's not a realistic time. That's not something Gary Kubiak's going to do. But I do think the timing of sort of the reports that Kubiak is interested in coming back, I don't think is a coincidence that you've heard sort of talk with the Falcons maybe looking to move on from Sarkisian after the season. Kubiak basically said to Jason Lock-on-4 this past weekend that with the right situation, the right quarterback, he'd be more than willing to come out of retirement and be a team's offensive coordinator. I certainly would imagine Atlanta would be on the short list to work with Matt Ryan, work with Julio Jones, work with Devontae Freeman, et cetera. Certainly makes a lot of sense from his perspective. And so if that's a move that Quinn feels he should make after the season, I would certainly applaud it. If he decides to stay the course with Steve Sarkisian, I certainly would not be going into 2018 with a lot of high expectations in terms of the Falcons season turning around. But at the same time, I said the same thing about Shanahan 2 years ago, and he wound up proving me wrong. But I don't feel like lightning is going to strike twice in that regard moving forward with Sarkisian. So we'll see what the Falcons do. If they fire Sark, I'm not going to complain about it. If they keep Sark, I'll probably complain about it, but I probably won't complain about it as much as everybody else will. So we'll see what happens. Brian asks, your homie Brian asks, Matt LaFleur has got the Rams playing like the 2016 Falcons. Do you think if we kept LaFleur, we would still be dropping 30 points a game?
LaFleur's not doing a damn thing but being a sounding board for McVay. Sean McVay runs that team.
Yes. Yeah, LaFleur is not the offensive. He's the offensive coordinator in name, but he's not calling plays, guys. Like he has nothing. I mean, he has something to do with offensive game planning, but has nothing to do with play calling. So people that want to give him credit for the Rams' offensive turnaround, that's really barking up the wrong tree. That's like giving Derek Coleman credit for Devontae Freeman having a really good season. He's like a very small part of it. Or better example, Joey Harrington deserves credit for Roddy White becoming a good wide receiver. I don't think anybody would be making that claim. Brian's next question.
Now, Matt LaFleur should have been kept on as a quarterback's coach. I will say that. Because I don't think he had any real issue as a quarterback's coach. Maybe Matt Ryan didn't like him, and that's why they got rid of him. But other than that, I thought he did a decent job last year and the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of underwritten aspects of the Falcons' offensive struggles is sort of the turnover on the offensive coaching staff. Basically, the offensive line coach and the tight end coach and Raheem Morris at wide receiver are the only guys that sort of stayed on from the Shanahan staff, and having a bunch of offensive assistants that knew the scheme, that had worked with Shanahan and sort of could coach towards the scheme. You don't really have that with Sarkisian. You don't really have that rapport. And so it's sort of one guy on an island that's supposed to be steering the ship with no NFL experience, no experience really working with NFL players. And so, now in hindsight, certainly nobody was making these claims back in February and March, but certainly in hindsight, we look at this and say, yeah, this is some of the reasons why things sort of zigged when we thought they would zag. I think, Scott, you already answered Brian's next question comparing Sark to Kyle Shanahan in the first year struggles. Do you have any other thoughts to add to that?
No, that's basically it.
Okay. Big boy Brewski, can we fix our drop passes and holding calls? What needs to be done, or is it just a mental thing?
Sports psychologist. Get someone in there to fix these guys' heads.
Yeah, I mean, catching a football is really sort of concentration and eye-hand coordination. I don't think eye-hand coordination is an issue for these guys. based off of how they played. So it's really a concentration issue. Holding, it can be a breakdown in concentration, but it also can be, that, you're trying to block Kawan short, and it's much easier to block him when you're holding him as opposed to trying to go straight up against him. So I think, penalties happen on the offensive line. I think the problem the Falcons are dealing with more so because of those issues is that because the offense is struggling, any sort of negative play that they have tends to have far greater consequences this year than we've seen from some of the past teams. And it's sort of reminiscent to some of that 2013 year and some of those years in the past where the Falcons would have, penalties and whatnot up front, and it would back up their offense and sort of cost them points and whatnot. So I think it's a similar sort of thing. Evan Birchfield asks, considering we are at the halfway point of our remaining schedule, what are your record predictions?
I'm going to go with 9-7. The Falcons lost 3 games in the first half of the season that I thought that they would win. One of those being the Bills, one of those being the Dolphins, and the other one being the Panthers. I honestly thought that the first part of the season was pretty easy compared to the second half.
Agreed.
So I was expecting basically 7-1 and then 5-3. Now, if they still go 5-3, I'm at least good on that side. And I think if they go 5-3 and make the playoffs, they could stand a real shot at doing damage, because going 5-3 against this schedule at the end it'd be amazing to see. Now, ideally, they go like 6-2 or even 7-1 on the second half and finish at 11-5, even like 12-4 and somehow win out. But let's be honest here, that ain't happening. So I think more than likely it's a 9-7 or even an 8-8 team.
Yeah, before the season, I had the Falcons at 7-1 at this point, and I had them finishing with a 4-4 back half of the schedule for an 11-5 finish. Obviously, they're 4-4 at this point. I think looking at the schedule, you got 5 more division games. Honestly, I think it's possible they could win 3 of those games. I don't think it's likely that they will. I think right now you're hoping that you can get 2 wins in the division. And then you're hoping honestly, I'm looking at the outside division games against Dallas, Seattle, Minnesota. I wouldn't favor the Falcons in any of those games right now based off of the way they've played, but maybe they sort of win against Dallas. I think Dallas is the most beatable of those 3 teams right now for them. So right now I'm really looking at a 7-9 finish, maybe 8-8 if I'm underselling them a little bit in the division, or maybe overselling. Maybe they can sweep Tampa Bay and get a win against Dallas. And then sort of split with New Orleans or something like that, and get to 8-8. But 7-9 at this point in time, I don't really see them making the playoffs right now without a significant improvement in their play on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but 7-9 I think right now is probably even being a little bit generous based off of the way they've played the last 5 games. John has a similar question. Realistically, do you think we can win out?
Realistically?
You said call me John, not John. Sorry, your name on Twitter is John. So, okay, I'll call you John.
I'm going to say realistically, no, the Falcons cannot win out. Can I say hopefully, if they get their shit together and somehow start scoring 30 to 40 points a game? Oh, if they score 40 points a game from here on out, which is the offensive potential, then yeah, they probably will win out. But let's be honest here, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't think that's realistic at this point. Again, you go back to the really since halftime of the Lions game, you really haven't seen a playoff team outside of maybe a quarter here, a quarter there, maybe a half there against Miami or something like that. You're not really seeing a team that's playing at a high level. And so it's not really realistic at this point to think that suddenly over these next 8 games, they're going to suddenly morph into a drastically different team. Now, maybe it's possible. They can certainly build towards something, and maybe they catch some breaks and sort of steal some wins or whatever you want to call it, and then get hot and then sort of maybe plow through the division or whatnot. But I don't think that's realistic. It's possible, but it's not really realistic. Last question comes from Evan Birchfield. What percentage chance do you think we have of making the playoffs?
30%. They got to win at least 6 of their last 8 games to make the playoffs. And looking at that schedule, if they win 6 of their last 8 games, they're doing damage in the playoffs. Like, this may be one of those years where they go to the wild card and they're that New York Giants of 2011 that just runs through the playoffs and wins every game by big margins. Like, that's the kind of team that I would expect them to be if they make the playoffs. So if they can win 6 games and do it, I could easily see this team being a Super Bowl contender. But they got to win their next 6 games because they ain't making the playoffs playing the way they have.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm no statistician or whatever statistician. And so I'll leave people to sort of crunch the numbers in terms of their playoff hopes. I've seen various websites put it somewhere between like 25 and 35%. At this point in time, that seems about accurate. There's a chance, but certainly I don't think it's a better than average chance based off of their record and sort of how they played the last couple of games. That being said, I think right now, my personal opinion, based off of the way they've played on the field, I feel like it's probably lower than that. But I'll give them some hope, and I'm hoping that we see against this Dallas team now that they're finally playing at home. That's an issue that they can sort of rebound and get some momentum back and get a win, a much-needed win, and sort of build down the stretch. But yeah, if you're betting money, if I'm giving you my semi-professional gambling advice, I would not put money on the Falcons making the playoffs right now. So find some good odds somewhere and bet against the Falcon money. Now, if you want to dwell in hope and optimism, no more power to you. I simply can't do it. But yeah, so. Do what you got to do, but I wouldn't necessarily start making January playoff plans at this point in time. So, guys, appreciate you guys giving us a listen or watching us. I know probably something's going on with the video and you're just seeing a logo as opposed to seeing our beautiful faces. But in the event of that, I do want you guys definitely, if you caught us late, midway through and you missed our interview or you caught the tail end of our interview with former Falcon linebacker Chris Draft, definitely go back and listen to it in its entirety. It was a great conversation with Chris. He talked football, talked about his own career, talked about some of the issues with the Falcons, and of course talked about what he does off the field and what other players are doing currently off the field and whatnot. And it's a great listen. And certainly if you guys want to find out more information about what Chris is doing off the field, check him out on Twitter at Chris Draft. Check out his website at teamdraft.org. You can also check out the fundraiser directly with the 2018 Super Bowl Challenge, which he explained over at crowdrise.com to sort of contribute and donate to those things. So definitely check that out. In the meantime, you guys can stay with us next week when we talk about this Cowboys game and we start to preview the Seattle game. If you want to send in your questions like all of our loyal and great listeners have, please use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can also tweet at the show at FalconsPFC. Scott is at Karasik S. I am at FalcFans. And certainly check out ProFootballCentral.com where you can find all the links to us on iTunes and whatnot. Check out Pro Football Central and Scott Karasik's page on YouTube. Subscribe to those so you can watch us live. And of course, check us out on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio, where you can also watch us live. So we'll be back next week to hopefully talk about a Falcons win. But if not, then maybe we'll start answering your guys' draft-related questions. So maybe that's something we can start firing up if the Falcons don't get out of this rut. So we'll see you guys next week.